Just bear with us. Thank you. My wife, Linda, and boy, have I ever relied on her. It's great to have family and friends here, even the family members who reluctantly came. So, Historic Hotel Del Monte. To help kind of give you a sense of my view of Del Monte, I want to step back just a few years to 1984. Ronald Reagan was the president. The United States and the Soviet Union were butting heads, and to show their anger, the Soviet Union boycotted the Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. The first TED conference was held in Monterey. Apple introduced the Macintosh, and I had a Kingdra. Advertised as a portable, weighed 26 pounds. 26 pounds, yeah. I stepped into what was called Herman Hall at the Naval Postgraduate School, and the only association that I had with the name Del Monte was the food company. I had never seen this label. Yeah, so a question that kind of evolves as a food company with a lithograph of a hotel on it in the 19th century, and how did that come about? Well, the Public Affairs Office had a two-drawer file cabinet. It had a folder for the Naval Postgraduate School and a folder for Hotel Del Monte. These were somewhat thin folders, mostly with clip files. A couple of mimeographed sheets and things like that, but relatively small. So, over the years, I did a little bit of digging. I kind of got tagged as someone who would, if visitors were really interested and we had the time, I'd spend time with them. So over the course of the years that I was in public affairs, and then later in setting up the archives for the Naval Postgraduate School, I developed an impression of why a food company would want to have the hotel on its label. And this is that impression. Thank you. Clearly romanticized. I was working on a course for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Michelle Crompton, who's the director of OLLI at CSUMB, and thank you for coming, Michelle. I felt like I needed to try and boil down a concept in fairly tight terms. So it is romanticized, but shortly after I had finished this, I came across this quote: "Aladdin's lamp could not have conjured anything more delightful That is September 11th, 1880, in the Pacific Rural Press. The hotel had just opened in June of that year, and within a matter of just a few days, less than a week, President Rutherford B. Hayes would become the first American president to cross the Rockies, cross the Sierras, enter California, and then arrive at Hotel Del Monte. His delegation, the Central Pacific Railroad and the Union Pacific Railroad, the two lines that had created the nation's first transcontinental railroad, they provided the president with 7 cars for himself and the delegation on the trip. The delegation included the Secretary of War, the Commanding General of the Army, and that would be General William Tecumseh Sherman, his family, and he was determined to see the nation that he governed. And when he left Del Monte to go to the Northwest Territories, there was no rail line at the time. He and General Sherman went by stagecoach and riverboat to get to Seattle, with Sherman at times riding shotgun. So it was, getting to Del Monte was not a simple task, and yet the hotel, as it opened, became an overnight success and had to turn down about 3,000 reservation requests in the first 6 weeks of operation. And these were guests coming from abroad, not just from the eastern United States, but from abroad. Princess Louise, for example. So it was an overnight success, and amazingly so, given the hardships that one endured. But that's not the Del Monte that I knew. This is Herman Hall. That's Herman Hall, the Roman plunge for the Loggia. This is the Hotel Del Monte that I became familiar with, and I'll go into this a little bit more. I took this photo in about the 26th or 27th year that I was on the staff, and at the time I had a certain reason for wanting to have the photograph, but then more recently I read a bit in Charlie Osborne's book about his grandfather, S.F.B. Morse, who was president of Del Monte Properties Company. And I learned that Sam's favorite horse was named Moonlight. And so this photo has a great deal of meaning. Morse's office, you can't see it, but it would be up on the mezzanine just to the left of the frame. This is the main lobby of the hotel. My first office was down below on in the basement in what had been the Turkish baths for the hotel. The Navy had modified it, and it was the public affairs office. In the spirit of transparency and honesty, I have to tell you, I have no credentials, either as a historian or as a historical storyteller. I did take a workshop, a weekend workshop with my wife Linda and a British storyteller, Ashley Ramsden, once. Linda taught elementary school. She loved introducing the students to children's literature. So, beware. My standards, I'll talk about my standards, but I'll tell you, Linda, in those early years when I was beginning to learn a little bit about the Del Monte history, I would go home, I would tell her something I'd learned, and she would say, you're just making that up. Yeah, and honestly, maybe I did it, I don't know. We'll see. So, I do have a couple of methods that I use that I think are traditional methods that historians use. One is to do a cross-section in time. And what I find is particularly important is to establish a vantage point or multiple vantage points to do those cross-sections. As these two images show, this is roughly the same vantage point near the Great Tide Pool at Asilomar. Two very, very different days. The top image at sunset with a little bit of energy in the wave action. The bottom, sunrise. That is the moon setting as the sun is rising. And so the scattering of the light, the moon is picking up that scattering of light and reflecting it. And serendipity, a sailboat came into the frame. As you can see, I'm an amateur photographer, but this is such a great place to try.
But the sun is setting there.
No, that is the moon setting.
Moon setting.
The moon is setting. The sun is rising on the other part, in the other part
There
of
was
the
no
horizon.
space on the moon.
That was camera resolution and, photographer limitations. An illustrated view of historic Hotel Del Monte has grown out of some of the experiences that I've had over the years. And so I'd like to read the opening chapter. An illustrated view of historic Hotel Del Monte, Chapter 1, the 17-mile drive. The 17-mile drive in California rests upon an ancient bed of granite along the southern shore of Monterey Bay. Cypresses grow among the boulders here, angular, accentuated, and artfully groomed by the sea wind. The regal cypress blends with stone and mist in an endless dance of shadow and light. Nearby are the tide pools of Asilomar and the esteros of Monterey. To the north are the sloughs of Moss Landing and Watsonville and the chalk cliffs of Santa Cruz. South are the Santa Lucia Mountains with sea coves of serpentine, jasper, and jade. Inland, along the Salinas River, lie the Gavilan Mountains in the valley of Steinbeck. Above the rocky shore of Pacific Grove stands a lighthouse, an early building of the American period. In Monterey are the adobes of Spanish and Mexican days, the canneries that once brimmed with sardines, and a fading trace of Hotel Del Monte, where the 17-mile drive first gained world fame. Being in nearly a century ago, artist Francis McComas called this setting the most beautiful meeting of land and sea in the world. And so I decided to try and set out, even given my amateur status, but to set out to see if I could portray this dance of shadow and light in the most beautiful meeting of land and sea in the world. And what I have to show you next is a work in progress. It's a draft. So hopefully some of the images will change, but I think I've got the basic concept laid out. Thank you. We're still a little high on the audio, a little loud, and I apologize for that. The last two, or in this closing sequence, you saw these two paintings. The one on the left is by Ferdinand Bergford. It is in the tower room of the hotel, and the one on the right here by Francis McComas. So these were completed when the Spanish Revival Hotel that I knew as Herman Hall was built in 1926. And I'll get to that a little bit later with some details, but these are images that characterize this incredible area. Those early years for the hotel were similar, but not anywhere near the level as the artistic presentation that you see in today's Herman Hall. This 1880 illustration by Jules Tavernier, which is from Terry Trotter's private collection, it depicts that initial Hotel Del Monte and points of interest in the area. And I clipped out a small portion of an advertisement that I found in the Library of Congress. If you've never been in the reading room at the Library of Congress in Washington, I highly recommend it. Even if you only spend a few minutes or an hour, but try it out. It's just an incredible place. 1881, you'll note 25 miles of splendid macadamized roadway and beautiful drives to Cypress Point, Carmel Mission, Point Lobos, Pacific Grove. That is the reference to what would become a later well-known drive. I especially note that a couple of things as I look at this, and it's the panel on the lower right, the bathing scene near the hotel with the hotel's bathhouse. This is an 1880 illustration. And I don't know much about what women wore in the Victorian era, but did they go barefoot on the beach at this time? In the right, lower right panel is a scene from Point Lobos, and especially noted, I think Tavernier sketched himself into the illustration in this particular case. You can see those outstretched arms and reverie. A little distinction between sojourners and excursions. President Hayes and General Sherman would have been sojourners on their journey because of the nature of that journey. And you can see, in fact, from this 1882 advertisement, Raymond and Whitcomb ad, a winter trip to California with a sojourn of 5 months and it highlights Hotel Del Monte during this 5-month sojourn. The party to leave Boston November 30th and be absent 6 months, returning June 83. 185 days with all traveling and hotel expenses included. The entire journey in palace drawing room and sleeping cars and every arrangement first class. Versus the excursionist. And here's a clip from roughly the same time, but a newspaper story. The excursion trip last Saturday on the Senator was a delightful one. The sea was as smooth as glass, down and up. And you saw from at least that one photo, yes, it can be smooth, but man, this bay is also pretty rough. No one seasick, and all hands at the dinner tables were good indications that all enjoyed themselves. A great proportion of the excursionists were females, bound to Santa Cruz and Monterey to see the sights. And so that gives you an idea of some of the people who came. But not everyone who came was happy. July 4th, Independence Day, 1880. A few days later, The Santa Cruz Sentinel reported some 500 people left San Jose for Monterey on Monday last, when they arrived at the ancient capital and found 3 miles of dust lay between them and Pacific Grove. They growled, groaned, mounted wagons, or struck out on foot. The day was damp and raw, and they returned the maddest excursionists you ever saw. You can find newspaper accounts from those times in which literally hundreds of people arrived in Monterey, were not excursionists. They did not have reservations at the hotel. They could not, because of sea conditions or a problem with the train, they could not get back home on their scheduled time. And so the hotel would set up cots in the hallway, hundreds of cots. I've seen numbers as high as 400 on a single night from newspaper accounts. Now, this issue of the Santa Cruz Sentinel from the 10th of July, 1880, that's accessible through an online database, the California Digital Newspaper Collection that UC Riverside has, and it has a pretty good search engine. What I find is sometimes if I actually use unexpected search terms, I get surprisingly good results. A small article from the Monterey Argus in 1886, along with an illustration of Pacific Grove and what would become the first major hotel in Pacific Grove. So 1886, in the Monterey Argus, it is said that architects are now busy on plans for a large hotel to be erected by the Pacific Improvement Company at Pacific Grove or at Point Cypress. It is well known that the company have for some time contemplated the building of a hotel at some convenient place of a cheaper grade than the Del Monte, and there is no doubt but that the project will soon be consummated, and it may be that the above rumor as to plans is correct. And in fact, the rumor was correct. Charles Crocker, who had built the Del Monte, the original Del Monte, did in fact begin in 1886 to build what became known as the El Carmelo. But a twist of fate, an unexpected fire, and suddenly the importance of the El Carmelo was ever greater because the Del Monte was completely destroyed. Reservations lined up for months in advance to go to the Del Monte. Some people, as you could see, making plans a year out or so just to be able to get there. And so Crocker, the El Carmelo had not been completed when the fire of 1887 occurred. Crocker was able to accelerate construction, and by the end of May, the El Carmelo opened. But curiously, there was no rail service to Pacific Grove. Charles Crocker, the pioneer, I'll read a section. And by the way, like historians, I do try, and I strive for both accuracy and clarity. With the book that I'm working on, An Illustrated View, I also set a goal for brevity. And so I want to try and keep it short, make it more of a brief pictorial narrative than an in-depth report. This is from chapter 2, International Acclaim. The fire was a setback for the railroad pioneer who had conquered the Sierras, but bordering the charred remains of Crocker's Hotel and untouched by the blaze lay his magical botanical garden with the racetrack and bathing pavilion just minutes beyond. The Garden Sylvan Walk was alive with exotic species from the southwestern desert, southern hemisphere, and Mediterranean, intermingled with native oak, pine, and cypress. A new and different setting revealed itself at each turn in the maze of pathways. More than 1,000 plant types, 210 varieties of evergreen trees and shrubs, 285 species of herbaceous plants, 90 varietals of roses, 78 conifer species, and more than 60 types of cacti, including 10-foot-high saguaros, created a sense of wonder and delight that engaged all of the senses and fueled Crocker's determination to rebuild. He did rebuild, and he made the Del Monte larger and grander than ever. And I haven't been able to quite piece together, though, why he didn't have rail service to Pacific Grove at the time of the fire, at the time that he was building El Carmelo. Here's a man whose crews in April 1869 set the record by laying 10 miles of track in a single day as they built the Transcontinental Railroad and rushed to Promontory Point, Utah, where the Golden Spike would be driven. And yet years elapsed before he got the line into Pacific Grove. Maybe some of you would be able to help me out in understanding why it took him so long to get the line here. It was initially just referred to as a dummy line, by the way, and I don't quite understand. That was a term, I guess, that railroads used at the time. In addition to the bathing pavilion, the racetrack, the botanical garden, there was also the scenic drive, those 25 miles of macadamized roadway that existed for excursionists and sojourners alike to enjoy. Now, in those early years, in the 1880s, it didn't really have a name. It was referred to interchangeably as the Scenic Drive and the Cypress Drive. And then by 1889, it became the 18-mile drive. This is from a souvenir booklet of 1889, and the description, I think, is worth reading. Skirting its pine-clad peninsula domain of 7,000 acres, I had never used that word domain in my entire life until I read this. And so I had to go to the dictionary. Basically it's the land of the Lord, the landlord's land, if you will. Anyway, skirting its pine, that doesn't sound very good or enticing. Skirting its pine-clad peninsula domain of 7,000 acres, the Pacific Improvement Company has constructed the finely macadamized road known as the 18-mile drive. And little is said when it is asserted that this is the grandest drive on the continent. Let us traverse it and note some of the strange and striking scenes which it discloses. Thank you for coming today. He is my source for this 1920s silent film called Sporting Youth. Greg, I don't know how many years he worked on tracking this down, but it was an amazing find, because the film was actually shot in 1923, late 1923, released in February 1924. So what you're seeing is the hotel before the second major fire. And I love this little loop. Reginald Denny, the star, he's kind of like the George Clooney or Clark Gable of his day. He comes rolling up in this custom-made boat-tailed Packard. Rick tells me that the Packard, after the film was shot, that an airplane engine was put in this Packard, and it set the world land speed record at 150 miles per hour. Now this is the 1920s. A distributor who had, I believe, 8 auto dealerships in California had a custom Packard named Del Monte in 1918. It was not just the food label, but Del Monte became the name for a Packard, a custom-made Packard. It was the name of a waltz. There were so many things that took their name from the hotel. Denny, it's kind of like a Abbott and Costello routine. You know, who's on first initially, and then you'll see look at that golf. There's a great golf guy. He's brought his, he's the chauffeur for an Eastern businessman, Eastern executive, and he's brought the executive's car to Monterey to enjoy the great climate and weather. I won't go into details, but the head porter, one of the items in the archives, we have a porter's hat, just like that in the archives at the Naval Postgraduate School. I can't say it's that one, but it's just the same, and it's the head porter's hat. This is the fire of 1924 that completely revamped Del Monte, leading to the Spanish revival Del Monte. And at this particular point in time, there's been a transition in ownership from the Pacific Improvement Company to what it was called Del Monte Properties Company, with Sam Morse as the president. As I mentioned, Charlie is going to be your speaker in February. His biography of his grandfather, Sam Morse, it is a must-read. And mark your calendars, because that's going to be a great, great program. A lot of people tend to think of Del Monte only as a single building, but at this time, Del Monte occupied over 18,000 acres around the peninsula and in Carmel Valley. And I tried to kind of sketch in the route for the 17-mile drive going into and out of the Del Monte forest. This is an interior shot, main lobby, Spanish revival with some Moorish influence and incredible craftsmanship. And the painting by Francis McComas that you saw earlier. McComas also painted this. It's on the opposite side of the room, on the north-facing wall. And from my earliest times at the Naval Postgraduate School, I heard rumors about a myth and a legend about this particular painting. You see, Prohibition had been established in 1919, and Francis McComas and his good friend Sam Morse were known for their enjoyment of good liquor. The rumor is that McComas was on his way home one evening, driving through Pacific Grove, and he was arrested for drunkenness. He was one of the world's most renowned artists in his day. He had just a couple of years before worked with Cecil B. DeMille to do backdrops for DeMille's first production of the Ten Commandments. It was the first time any Hollywood producer had been able to convince an artist, a prominent artist, to work on sets. So he was well known both as a painter and then through Hollywood. And yet, when he was arrested, apparently he was detained for an extended time. And when he was finally released, he was irate. Yeah, irate. And he subsequently told a friend that he had taken revenge on Pacific Grove. That he had wiped Pacific Grove off the face of the earth. Yeah, so many of you know this is the geographic location of Pacific Grove. And Moss Beach is that spit of sand that's out by the White House, where there have been a number of historic shipwrecks. And when you look closely, it almost looks as if there's a little extra brushwork in this particular area of Moss Beach. Yeah. Now, my source that said, yeah, this is really true. And I try, honestly, despite what Linda was telling you, that I make stuff up. I do try and get to ground truth. And my source for this, little Freddie Stanley. Yeah, son of the hotel manager who grew up at Del Monte. He found hidden liquor closet in the cottage that he was living in. And he kind of, so clicked for him as a kid why so many noted people came to his father's home, like Jean Harlow. This is the photograph that she autographed for him and is now in the archives at the Naval Postgraduate School as well. Artists played a very significant part in the life and culture at Del Monte during the Morse years. And in 1933, when the 21st Amendment was passed and ratified, repealing prohibition, it's the only constitutional amendment that makes a decision and changes another amendment of the Constitution. It is historic, and I'm not a constitutional expert, but it is the only one in the history of our nation that reverses another amendment. December 5th, the 27th state ratifies the 21st Amendment. It will be enacted, and it is set to be enacted on December the 15th for liquor to become legal once again. But before December 15th, the Del Monte throws a party. Yeah. Joe Mora did the illustrations for this cocktail recipe book. Cocktail recipes mixed by famous people for a famous hotel. And in fact, the Del Monte, because December 5th was during the week itself, so they had to wait until really the weekend to have this great competition for cocktail recipes. And this page just shows you Samuel Blythe, the merry-go-round cocktail, Edgar Rice Burroughs, the Tarzan Special, Marx Brothers, Honeymoon Punch. One of these, The Honeymoon is Over, is its subtitle. And of course, these were all tested by experts for the Del Monte party. Now, the booklet, cocktail recipe booklet, I don't believe that came out until April of the following year. And I don't believe that this particular recipe called the Pacific Grove cocktail was actually tested. Because it says 2 dashes vinegar, 1 teaspoonful Worcestershire sauce, 1 egg, 2 dashes Tabasco sauce, a little pepper and salt, and do not break the egg. I can't picture them having tested that, but the merry-go-round cocktail by Samuel Blythe won the competition, and you'll note this is published December 11th, 4 days. The article itself of the competition and the party is published 4 days before prohibition is, and the repeal is actually to be enacted. But like I said, people were being pretty lax by that time. This article is among those that you can find through the Monterey Public Library digital newspapers. They have a great treasure trove that they're starting to put online for people who are interested in digging into the community history as it was reported. Now, understand, of course, that newspapers and anything that's published by an official organization, take it with a grain of salt. There are going to be typos. But, yeah, so this one notes that alleged last-minute entry by Will Rogers was turned down. So Samuel Blythe was identified as a prominent political commentator, and the party was done by the National Association for the Fine Art of Drinking. The cocktail recipe book, when it came out, had this recipe for the fine art of living. And you'll note that it says, in this miniature kingdom of 20,000 acres, everything from the finest cuisine to a variety of recreational activities can be found. For the fine art of living is all a part of Del Monte's service. The 30s were a vibrant time for, despite or in spite of the Depression years. So this is 1933, and the next year, Joe Mora, along with Francis McComas, Armin Hansen, Charlton Fortune, Paul Whitman, William Ritchell, August Gus Gay, just an amazing array. Oh, Samuel Blythe is in there. They're on the general committee for the Carmel Art Association's first Ball Mosque. You'll note the cover design for the Ball Mosque program. 1935, Armin Hansen and Paul Whitman were commissioned by Sam Morse to take that flying pig. And I'm thinking, so, the phrase, the kind of phrase, when pigs fly? Yeah. Oh yeah, that'll happen when pigs fly. Prohibition will end when pigs fly. This was a mural done for what had been initially labeled the children's playroom in the 1926 blueprints, because prohibition was in effect. The children's playroom overnight became the Del Monte Tap Room, and then it became, this mural was installed. I got to see this in 2009, and this is a Javier Chagoya photograph. Mike Whittington was the director of the Monterey Museum of Art, and a lot of the canvases, not all of them, but most of them, are in their collection. So he had the gallery on Pacific Street cleared out, prepared, so that he could lay down the entire set of murals that they had. There's the flying pig with the clown riding on it. And that part of the mural was right behind the cash register. Yeah. I don't know if there's symbolism in that, but same year that the Hansen-Whitman mural was completed, Del Monte put together a color marketing film, and no audio to it. So I'm just going to run a short loop because it gives you a sense of how the Del Monte portrayed itself in terms of getting guests to the hotel. You saw the autos on the 17-mile drive, the Del Monte Express, and now the commercial airliner. The airfield, very similar location to today's Monterey Airport, on land that Sam Morse had provided for that purpose. And compare their clothing to what you might wear when you travel today versus what President Hayes probably wore or his wife may have worn in the 19th century. remarkable, remarkable differences. 1935, I'm going to take it quickly just to go back to the party atmosphere at Del Monte. And one of the more notable parties developed by an artist or in conjunction with an artist.
Just to start things off, as hostess, she presides from a red velvet bed. The party is a benefit for refugee artists, and costumes are supposed to represent the guest, Mad Green. Artist Dolly wears ear flaps, representing anatomy. A puzzled guest, Bob Hope, sees the fish course served in satin slippers. Presumably, the fish is soul. Soldier Jackie Coogan and the still baffled Mr. Hope see the main course. The party is surrealism, but them frogs is real.
Benefit for refugee artists. Bob Hope in Virginia Stanton told me that Bob Hope would show up at the most opportune time. I'm sorry, I should have used the mic. He would show up at the most opportune times. Virginia was one of my information sources for a number of years. So, the United States, just months later, enters the war, and a short time after that, the Navy arrives to use Del Monte as a training command, the Del Monte Pre-Flight School. Are any of you Berkeley alumni? There's a show of hands, any Berkeley? Okay. There were 4 pre-flight schools in 1943. Commander Tom Hamilton was negotiated with the NCAA. These were not colleges, but they allowed their schools to field athletic teams, compete with colleges of the day. Del Monte Pre-Flight, 8th ranked nationally in college football polls. Count 48-7 was the score, the final score. So, with this kind of history, I know what some of you are thinking. This place has to be haunted. And I will go to some irrefutable evidence of that. 1993, 50 years after the Navy's arrival, my wife Linda captured this photograph of a ghost. Well, maybe it's not exactly paranormal activity, but the way it happened, Tom Mercer, who was an aviator, he and his wife thought it would be a really great idea if a ghost could appear at the Navy birthday ball. Now, the Navy was established during the Revolutionary War, Continental Congress in 1775, and they allowed privateers to capture ships and convert them for Navy use. So in the Revolutionary War, the United States Navy had 65 ships that flew the Jack. And some people think it's red and white field of stripes with a serpent diagonally across, and "Don't tread on me" written at the base. But the Navy Historical History and Heritage Command says there's just not enough evidence for that. 1775, and years after, the Navy began to celebrate its birthday. So Tom and Becky said, "Can a ghost appear?" And they kind of looked in my direction. So I looked in Linda's direction, and she did the makeup, and we rented an outfit, and we set up a plot, a basic scheme. And so the ballroom, what the Navy calls the ballroom, it was the hotel's main dining room. It's basically, if you were on a football field today, sitting at midfield, you would be looking at basically about 2/3 the size of a football field. Basically, the width of the college, the hash marks on the side, and about 2/3 the length, with ceilings high enough to be goalposts. Sam Morse, by the way, had been an All-American football player at Yale. I don't know if there's any connection between the dimensions of this room and that room and Sam, but he loved football. So you're sitting in that room, 600 plus people, right? And all of a sudden, the lights go out completely, pitch black. The only thing that you see is a ray of light coming through the doorway. And as people turn to look toward that ray of light, the doors. Yeah. And a spotlight comes on to a small door where smoke is billowing out. And I stepped through the smoke. The oxygen in that room just completely went out. Completely. Okay, I can kind of picture my placement interview with St. Peter. He's looking over my application package, and he has this photo that I've provided as supplemental documentation and for a highlight. And so he kind of asked me to explain myself, and I give him the whole story. And St. Peter, this was the greatest prank of my life. Initially, St. Peter's given me kind of the look, you know, like Lucy used to give to Ricky when she would say, "Ricky, you got some splaining to do?" You know, it's that kind of look. But, you know, he kind of nods, and then he says, "Okay, well, what about Bob Hope?" So I said, "Okay, another Navy birthday ball." This time, I was in a meeting with the Naval Postgraduate School president, and we'd been through most of the agenda items, and all of a sudden, this wasn't on the agenda. He says, "We got this birthday ball coming up. We need to do something different." And without thinking, I say, "Pay tribute to Bob Hope." And he looks at me, and I'm kind of filling in on what I knew about Bob Hope and his relationship to the Del Monte. And he says, "I like it. Make it happen." Talk about a scramble. And when I back briefed others in the public affairs office, Javier just went to work. He got me a camouflage jacket with Hope stenciled over the pocket and a purple heart. And I worked up a routine that was initially an attempted monologue, then leading into a tribute statement. Hope had passed away just earlier in the year. And so in the monologue, I start to tell a couple of the lines to St. Peter. My favorite golfing partner is President Gerald Ford, the man who made golf a contact sport. And I get the timing down. Bob Hope had such impeccable timing. It's easy to spot the president on the golf course. His card is the one with the red cross emblazoned on it. Whenever I play golf with President Ford, I always make sure it's a foursome. The president, myself, a paramedic, and a faith healer. Well, it looks like St. Peter's kind of softening up just a little bit. He looks down for a moment, nods his head. President Ford, he still shanks the ball badly. For everyone's protection, we put an angel in all of his golf pairings. Bob Hope, the greatest boost to morale ever. And Hotel Del Monte, a little piece of heaven on earth. May its memory live forever.